What's going on, guys? Welcome to our review of episode 3. There is a ton of stuff to unpack and this episode gets right to it. So stick around because you don't want to miss any of the action. As always, don't forget to subscribe to our channel, turn on notifications so every time we drop new videos, you'll be the first to know about it. We start off by getting a whole lot of information about this Global Repatriation Council, and that thread runs through pretty much the entire episode. One thing of interest to me in the commercial was their comment about borders, but the fact that the Repatriation Council brought this up in their commercial kind of worried me a little bit that they're able to, or at least think they can cross boundaries and cross borders and work without that. It made you feel like maybe it was a United Nations type scenario, but clearly the Flag Smashers think there's something wrong with that, and it kind of bothered me as well. Who's in charge of that? Is it the United States government's way of stretching their influence in what looks like a peacekeeping way, but in reality, it's a way to control the chaos and kind of leverage their own power moving forward? I think we're going to see more of that, and I think in some ways, it's why the Flag Smashers are having such a problem with what's going on in the world, especially since, as you find out later, there's a lot of refugees that were displaced that the GRC has not helped in taking care of, and the Flag Smashers really have a problem with that, particularly Carly, who has a lot of backstory that we haven't explored yet, but you got a little bit of that with her friend that is dying of tuberculosis. But before we get to that, let's talk about the prison break and John Walker as well. The action gets started right away as we catch up with John Walker, who is, in my mind, conveniently in Germany as well. He has infiltrated the safe house of the Flag Smashers that we saw from the last episode. And at the beginning, I kind of thought, oh, Battlestar knows some German and they're really trying to track down these leads. And then Walker gets frustrated and slams the guy up against the wall. Clearly not Captain America material, and we're getting those little hints over and over that he's a little different. I couldn't help think good cop, bad cop compared to Steve, good cap, bad cap, so to speak. And I was not on board, and I don't think anybody will be, with John Walker's bad cap imagery that he put forward here. And I know Lamar tries his best to reframe that by saying, oh, I know you want this guy just as bad as anybody and you're just passionate. No, Captain America was passionate as well, and we never saw Steve really get angry like that to the point where he would cross a line and disrespect somebody in that regard. Correct me if I'm wrong, but that seemed a little out of place. Again, more action right off the bat. We get the prison scene. But as Bucky is explaining to Sam and walking him through, what if this happened? What if that happened? What if hypothetically these things went on? We discover that Bucky actually went ahead and did that. He didn't ask Sam's permission, he just did it. Not that he has to ask Sam's permission, but nobody's in charge here. That's the world of the Avengers that we're left with. No borders, no laws, just like the Repatriation Council, just like the rest of the world. Everybody is struggling to find their place. The encounter between Bucky and Zemo was really intense, with Zemo throwing those trigger words back out at Bucky and the reaction that he has to those. I think he's dealt with that in some way because there's no fear, there's no worry, and he even says, that's not me. Zemo acknowledges that by saying, well, look, I just wanted to see how you'd react to that. There's a little bit of cat and mouse there, but I love the way that Daniel Bruhl has played this off, because there's almost a playfulness to it, and you almost root for him a little bit. In a few scenes, they made you sympathize with Zemo a little bit and be okay with the fact that he was with them. I actually want to see more of their team up. Now, I know at some point, because they foreshadowed it, Zemo's going to run. He's going to put on that mask. He's going to become that darker version of himself, and it's going to be a big problem. Now, whether or not that happens in this series, or it's something that they push off to another movie or a series, has yet to be seen, but it's gonna happen. He can't turn good, I don't think. He has too many demons and too many things that he has to right on his own behalf to connect himself with the Avengers or anybody for that matter. I think it goes against his whole moral code, so to speak. The conversation that Sam and Bucky have about what they're allowed to do and what they're not allowed to do is really mirrored by John Walker and Lamar's conversation in the prison. Although again, there's that good Cap, bad Cap thing where Walker says, look, let's just keep this to ourselves. We're going to do our own thing. It was surprising to me, and they gave you a few hints, that the new Cap was allowed to function outside of the United States. Perhaps with this Global Repatriation Council, that's how they're blurring the lines and allowing him to do this. But there was no world where, according to the Sokovia Accords, heroes were allowed, especially ones owned by the government, were allowed to go outside of American borders. That was something that was really addressed in Civil War that they just seemed to blow past in this episode. And John was really adamant about, we're just going to do this on our own. And if we're able to solve this, the why doesn't matter. This whole end justifies the means thing was completely contrary to what Steve stood for, completely contrary to the way Sam works. And it's going to be interesting how this continues to play out. They're pitting these guys on opposite sides of a very narrow moral spectrum where John Walker is doing things that seem good, but the motives and the end game here is not really going to be the same on both sides. Both of these paths are not going to end up in the same place morally. And I'm really excited to see how that turns out because it's just more character development. Thought it was really cool when Zemo perks up as Bucky mentions the super soldier serum. Right off the bat, you saw these guys are going to pair up. Their interests are aligned, and Zemo was all in for that. Again, he's going to run at some point, but they need each other, and Sam and Bucky have no place to go. The bank scene in episode 1 was further highlighted, and it actually kind of made me a little happy, even though it happened with nefarious means, that Zemo was rich. I thought it was a really cool way to throw in that he was a baron. Oh yeah, I'm a baron, I'm rich. But that's also how Bucky and Sam can get funded to do all the things that they need to do for the rest of this series. Now, where they get funded from here on out and how they survive is going to be interesting. I hope they address that a little bit because they really hit that hard in this episode, how Sharon was able to fund herself by doing underground backdoor art dealings and things like that, and then Sam and Bucky being funded by Zemo in the course of this investigation. I was really excited to find out really quickly. We're headed to Madripoor. That was teased in all the trailers. We knew it was coming. This mythical Marvel city where the criminal underworld is just living and running rampant, that has so many ties to mutants. We actually got one a little later on. Check out our Easter egg video that's coming soon. We're going to talk a lot about that. But there were some mutant references in this episode. There's a lot of other Easter eggs throughout the city of Madripoor that we're going to explore later. But this was a really cool place, and I thought right off the bat, they threw us into this new culture, this new created place that if you need something bad, if bad guys are going to hide out, this is where they're at. You got your Power Broker references. All kinds of different characters show up. This new character, Selby, who is actually in the comics. We're going to talk about that in an Easter egg video as well. And then our references here to Dr. Nagel, and the interactions there are really interesting, and there's a lot to unpack there. Like I said, check out our Easter egg video later on because we don't have time to cover it all here. There's just so much in this episode. On our way to Madripoor, however, this conversation with Zemo and Bucky was very, very rich. I told you guys early on, every time that Bucky is talking and sharing when he's not fighting is just more character development since you never got it before. And Zemo reading this book, but having Bucky's list, not only Bucky getting frustrated because Zemo had that, the little slip that Sam makes by saying that this was Steve's journal, that he wrote down the things that we saw in the Winter Soldier. was actually a really cool little thing that I did not expect. It further showed that Bucky is trying to connect with Steve to keep that connection solid and alive. Just something about Bucky having his list at the back of Steve's list about the things that he missed in life. It really made you feel for the guy because he's trying to connect with Steve in any way he can, trying to continue his legacy. But in the book of Steve, before Bucky is even worthy to do that, he's got his own list he's got to go through. And it has nothing to do with the music he missed and the movies he didn't see. It has everything to do with the people he's wronged. That's his past. That's his current legacy. And he can't start a new one until he closes that chapter. It was further accentuated by him just falling back into his Winter Soldier role in Madripoor as Zemo plays him off as some big, heavy brute, and even making the comment, wow, he fell back into that really quickly. It was very telling. It's something that Bucky really has to fight against. It might be something that Sam worries about on Bucky's behalf, and it's definitely going to be the thing that grounds Bucky when Sam comes around to being the new Captain America. Bucky needs that. He needs that legacy intact. That was something you got in the counseling session last episode. I was interested and wondered if Bucky reverting to the Winter Soldier was enjoyable, if it was a relief, if it was a chance for him to fight almost with permission that his counselor wouldn't give him. Don't hurt anybody. Well, okay, Bucky didn't hurt anybody. The Winter Soldier did. If he was conflicted about that or if he enjoyed it, it was a moment where me as a fan got to connect with Bucky in a way that maybe Bucky wasn't even connecting with himself, and that Sam was definitely watching. As we get the meeting with Selby, it was interesting to me, and it made me think of the gaps in Civil War that we didn't see as to how Zemo was able to pull off the things that he did in Civil War. We get a little bit of that backstory if you think about the fact that Zemo had these connections with people like Selby and maybe the power broker, and that's how he was able to fund and get these backdoor deals and make the things happen that he did in Civil War. It's here that we get our first indication of who our mystery doctor is. I really thought they were going with Dr. Malice, and they may well yet, since some things happened to Dr. Nagel. But Dr. Nagel is also a character in the Marvel Universe. He does a lot of experimentation on Isaiah Bradley, and they mention that briefly. Not only does Nagel mention it as the American test subject, but then Sam gets frustrated because he wouldn't even mention Isaiah Bradley by name. It was interesting to me, however, you got a little bit of backstory about what happened between the snap and the blip here, that before the snap, Nagel was picking up the work that Hydra left off after Civil War when Zemo destroyed the program in Russia, but that the CIA hired him to continue this. So the CIA is actively working on a super soldier serum. The government, I think that was glossed over a little bit, and we need to mention it, is that the super soldier serum was being worked on by the United States government, which very well means that may be how John Walker becomes U.S. agent. We know the government has some, or is at least willing to get some serum and store it, because that's how they turned Emil Blonsky into a super soldier before he takes some of Bruce Banner's blood and becomes Abomination. That is definitely going to rear its head again, what the government is doing and why they are pursuing super soldier serum and how John Walker fits into that. I think we're going to get a super soldier battle at the end of this series before everything's said and done. We meet up with Sharon Carter here. I was so excited to see her. Her introduction gave us a lot, actually. I was less interested in her story and more interested in her personality. The fact that she is so angry and right on the edge of being a bad guy. She could flip at a moment and not be a good guy. She actually felt a little more like Zemo in that moment, where she was towing this line between being the good guy and dealing with the nasty stuff, where Zemo is the bad guy, but he's dealing in the good guy stuff for now. And just the opposite sides of those coins and how closely related they are. It's the same thing with Sam and John Walker. Same coin, but different sides. And we're going to see a lot more of that. These characters who look juxtaposed are actually closer and more related than we think they are. And I loved that Sam actually puts forward, even though he can't actually do anything about it, that he's going to get her pardoned. He's going to get her back to the States. It was a nice mirror image of what happened in episode 2 when John Walker steps in and gets Bucky out of jail and takes all the credit for it. You know, hey, how did you get out of prison? And John Walker just kind of gloats over it for a second. Sam offers the same thing, but in a much more heartfelt and upright manner. I'm going to right this wrong. I'm going to fix this. This is an injustice, and it shouldn't stand. Again, these very Captain America-like moments that Sam, I don't even think is aware that he's doing. It's just in his character. Again, with Sharon, you got a lot of emotion and feeling, and a reminder again that a lot of people have been affected in a lot of different ways by not just the snap, but the blip, bringing people back. We saw that in WandaVision with the way that Monica reacted and how she's dealing with that. We've seen a lot of that with how the Flag Smashers are reacting and their motivations, but then Sharon was affected by it too, and it not really in a good way. And so we're going to get more of that. I love the way that the writers are developing this world and showing those things to us. It's really giving some meat and some depth to the motivations behind what these characters are doing. And again, these shows are just evidence that Marvel can slow down and give us some depth and some meat to these stories. It excites me for the movies because once we see these characters on the big screen again, we're going to have all this backstory and all these things that we've experienced with them that are just going to be meat on the bones of an already great story. Also, can we just pause for a moment and appreciate how hardcore Sharon Carter is here? She kicks butt. She takes out all these guys and just, it was just exciting to watch. I was kind of mouth agape during the whole thing, watching her just battle these guys. She's tough. We knew that before, but just getting to see her again in action was really exciting. In the middle of this whole Dr. Nagel encounter, we got a lot of that information about where he was and what he was, but as it comes to a head and Zemo shoots him because they don't have time, okay, we're definitely not keeping him alive. Maybe this opens the door for Dr. Malice, but somebody's going to have to come in and take his place because the Power Broker is not going to let that stand. Carly is right. The Power Broker is going to have to seek out the Flag Smashers because they're the only one with Super Soldier Serum anymore, which does kind of narrow the scope of where this story is going and moving around some chess pieces, so to speak. But the Power Broker can't possibly let that stand, and maybe this is where a Dr. Malice comes in. At this point, we may not get that in this show. I'm a little bummed because Malice has a lot more connections to the MCU than this Nagel guy, but it's anybody's guess now. They kind of threw some things up in the open. They introduced a new character and immediately he's gone. When that happens, it looks like Zemo is running. I think it's probably some foreshadowing, but Zemo gets this moment where he becomes the darker version of Zemo. He puts on that mask and he fights in a very brutal way to get what he wants. And Bucky and Sam are saved. They move on with him, and Sharon goes off her own way. But there's this interesting interaction with, I guess, her assistant or whoever it is. She's got some other things up her sleeve too. She's working some other angles as well. Again, more chess pieces moving, and I think we're going to see these before the end of the show. Who's doing what? Who's making moves? Not just Sharon and Sam and Bucky and Zemo, but the Flag Smashers, the government, all these different people have motives, and they're all going to kind of align at some point, and it's going to make for a really intense encounter. The joke here, the throwback to Civil War, was excellent. Sam sits in the back seat instead of Bucky. Bucky's in the front seat, and Sam says, "You're not going to move your seat, are you?" Of course not. I love the payback. It was a lot of fun. As we get back on the airplane, Sam and Bucky have this conversation about Steve's shield again, with Sam just doubling down again on, "I don't deserve that shield. I should have just destroyed it." And Bucky's again reminds him that shield has a legacy. That shield is important. And Bucky's reasoning is to just grab it, to steal it. And Sam is not okay with that, but he's also not okay with taking it. I think at some point, somebody's going to have to take the shield away from John Walker, if for no other reason than to keep it from John Walker and the government. If they can't have it, nobody can. And that's where they're going to start, but I think it's going to end up where Sam has to take that shield. But Bucky's going to be the only person that can tell him, you can take this, you're worthy of this. I'm kind of interested to see if they make a moment out of that. Not of him taking the shield, but the reason behind him taking the shield. He's going to have a good motivation that we can point to because he's been so conflicted about it. Back with the Flag Smashers, we're getting more information about the GRC, and it's evident by the Flag Smashers having to go in and steal a lot of the food from the GRC that they're the ones, at least in the Flag Smashers' eyes, that are deciding who lives and who dies, who's a refugee and doesn't get help, and who's a refugee and does get help. To the Flag Smashers, they're the ones that decide who lives and dies. And as we leave that encounter where the Flag Smashers steal the food from the GRC, we find out that Carly is willing to decide who lives and dies. She blows up the GRC building. One of her compatriots says there were people in that building, and she is adamant that we have a bigger focus and a bigger motive than those people, and we're going to get that done no matter the cost. The line by Zemo here as they show up in Riga is very interesting, and some backstory about Sokovia as well. Not only is Zemo using that as a moment to remind Sam, did you guys even go to the memorial? Have you checked out Sokovia? You know, I doubt it. You don't think about the repercussions of what you do, you just do it. But the little throwaway line here that Sokovia was picked over by neighboring countries in the rubble, in the aftermath of Age of Ultron, really made you feel for Zemo again, that these things happened and that's where he came from. That's from the rubble of that city, from the picked over ruins of Sokovia. That's how he was raised up. It makes more sense as to where the Flag Smashers came from, in the ruins of the blip, of the things that happened there. These people have been raised up, and they have ulterior motives to the good and bad that the Avengers see in the world. It's a gray area. It's here that we get a twist that I did not see coming, but I think is going to fit so well. As Zemo and Sam go into this house, wherever they're going for episode 4, Bucky stops and says, I'm going to take a walk. And he picks up this little silver thing. Maybe some of you picked it up right off the bat. I did not. I thought, what are these breadcrumbs? And after the second one and he finds somebody, when he turns around, I was surprised and shocked and excited to see the Dora Milaje standing there. It was awesome. It's such a great connection that Bucky recognizes Wakandan tech, that he knows that they're there, that he wasn't surprised, that he's wondering when they were going to show up. What their connection is to this? Is it some kind of vibranium connection? Is it a super soldier connection? That is going to be very interesting. It's a nice little wrinkle in this story. It's a wild card in it, but these guys, for all of their trouble with Killmonger and all those kind of things, Wakanda has always been this steadfast line of, we're not going to do the wrong thing. This moral high ground here that Wakanda seems to inhabit within their own borders and now within the world is going to be really interesting to see how that blends with these gray areas that we've seen in the Flag Smashers and Bucky and Sam and Zemo and Sharon Carter. How do those things play out, and where does Wakanda come down on these things? This is going to be really interesting. I'm curious to see how many Black Panther references they make in the wake of Chad Boseman's death. It's going to be interesting to see, but it's an exciting twist, and it's going to make episode 4 even that much more exciting. I can't wait for it. I don't know about you guys, but it's going to be great. The last 3 episodes are coming, and I am here for all of them. What do you guys think? Tell us in the comments. Check out some of our other videos, but more importantly, subscribe and turn on notifications so that you can get notified whenever we drop new videos. That's all we've got for you guys. We'll catch you later.